Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first AI Applied Consortium podcast. So, this entire series, which is going to be hopefully indefinitely long with all sorts of different guests, we're going to go through our trustees, starting with the Chancellor of Penn State Du Bois, Jungwoo Ryu, JR. I'm going to call in from
Oh
now
wow,
on
you
in the
got the
presentation.
pronunciation right
That's what
there. Good.
I always
Perfect.
avoid it, but I practice it for this. No, I've
Yeah,
known you
excellent.
for quite some time.
Yes, yes,
I've
yes.
heard you say it enough times for me to
Oh, good.
get it
Yeah.
right eventually.
Wow.
Uh, but I mean, again, the goal of this, and you asked me this a little bit yesterday, JR,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is really to talk about cool things that matter around artificial
Mm-hmm.
intelligence with as many
Mm-hmm.
different lenses
Mm-hmm.
as we can bring to the table.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in the world of
Mm-hmm.
academia
Mm-hmm.
from a couple of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
But first, JR, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a little bit more detail
Sure.
and
Yeah.
share with us, like,
Mm-hmm.
both who you are, the organization that, of course, you
Yeah.
represent, and a little bit more about your perspective on
Right.
artificial intelligence, and then we'll
Yeah.
get to it.
Yeah. My current role is the Chancellor and Chief Academic Officer at Penn State Du Bois. Yeah, Penn State has 24 locations. So there are lots of campuses out there, but we are one of the smaller campuses. Before working at Penn State Du Bois, I used to work at another campus called Penn State Altoona. But I've been working at Penn State for the past 20 years. When I started at Penn State, I was an assistant professor of information sciences and technology. I am a full-time administrator at the moment. I have all my degrees in computer science. My research interest has been mainly in software engineering and software security, as well as cybersecurity. So, as a computer science researcher, AI is definitely relevant, and I've definitely witnessed the evolution of AI when we were talking about AI only in theory. Just like cloud computing, we did have distributed computing in computer science long time, but the technology wasn't really accessible until we reinvented distributed computing in this case and called it cloud computing. So I think the similar thing is happening to AI. I mean, AI has been around for a long time, but finally we have a more affordable and accessible form of artificial intelligence that's starting to have a very huge impact on all of us.
Right. Yeah. So let me pick at some of the low-hanging fruits for our
Mm-hmm.
discussion. Some of them are, called a little self-promotional, but I think they're also relevant to the people that might be listening. So the AI Consortium, of course, you're a trustee, and we've been working
Sure.
for quite some time
Mm-hmm.
together over the years. And part of what we've built is this AI sandbox that is an extension to your
Yes. Mm-hmm.
IoT lab, to your IoT
Mm-hmm.
4.0 lab, and we had some really interesting exposure, I would call it, and like recognition around this
Yes.
lab. So we worked with the United States Center of Advanced Manufacturing to publish a 360 view of manufacturing or AI in manufacturing, which I think is an
Yes.
interesting piece, and we can talk about it a little bit. You, as a supporting, very important cast member in the lab, supported some of the work that we did with IBM and
Mm-hmm.
the sustainability award that Penn State collaborated on, that they recently won, or that
Mm-hmm.
you were recognized as one of the people that
Yes.
were obviously part of
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
which is also an important conversation topic. I think sustainability in manufacturing, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
you have the manufacturing lab, so we can open that
Mm-hmm.
up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But to end the self promotion, maybe can you tell us a little bit about that lab?
Oh yeah.
Because I think, well, we may not have a huge audience on this particular
Mm-hmm.
session. And like I said, this is a new kind
Mm-hmm.
of idea that we built on a new platform. So what can go wrong if I start sharing stuff, which I will?
Sure.
Uh, but I think both the audience that's listening live and
Mm-hmm.
then kind of the audience that will come and connect with this,
Mm-hmm.
I think podcast is the right name for this. Uh,
Yeah.
by the way, someone challenged me, a colleague challenged me on this name and said, "Well, we don't have to watch this because it's a podcast, right?" And I'm like, "No, we're going to be on video." So I went and I think that's the kind of synonymous name for this stuff now. But anyway, uh, there are students here that are interested in collaborating, that might be interested in
Mm-hmm.
collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
There's communities of end users in the manufacturing space that we obviously have an active call to action for to help them in their artificial intelligence journeys that can make use of this. So tell us a little bit about this lab. And as you do, when you hit upon some of these concepts, I'm going to share my screen and share some of this, the stuff that we did together.
Yeah, we have this very special place called Launchbox, and it was envisioned as basically a business incubator. At Penn State, we have these launch boxes all across the state, and our launch box is, one of the, most successful ones out there. Not every launch box at Penn State has a makerspace, but our launch box, the particular one we have, is called Idea Lab, and we do have a makerspace, and the name of the lab is Idea Lab. Since I started working at Penn State Du Bois here for the past 3 years, I've been really trying to work together with our team at the Launchbox to expand our idea lab because we have a lot of basically manufacturers in our area needing help, especially when it comes to getting exposed to new technologies, trying to do prototyping, and so on. So our idea lab is a perfect place for the manufacturers in our area to experiment with different technologies and so on. So we are really trying to be very cutting edge at our idea lab, and we have a lot of powerful capabilities at our idea lab. We essentially started with additive manufacturing. So we have a lot of 3D printers. We have our laser printer, razor, in this case, engraver. We have our 3D virtual reality capabilities and so on. But recently, we acquired some robots, and one of the robots is actually coming from the AI applied consortium in this case. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity for us to house the industrial robot at our lab. And because of the expansion, now we're uh, using multiple spaces. So we started with our idea lab, but now we are at another lab called Innovation Lab. That's where the industrial robot provided by the AI Applied Consortium provided. And we've been able to really make a very exciting showcase for many manufacturers in our area to be able to share some of these features that could be transformative to the industries around us, especially in the area of, I would say, Industry 4.0. Automation, of course, is really important, especially now because we are, these manufacturers especially struggling to, hire people, but the labor available in the area, the pool is shrinking. So automation could be really the key to handling some of those challenges. But because of the capabilities we have at the innovation lab, we are able to feature multiple, I would say, technologies, including, of course, artificial intelligence, because one of the things we're trying to accomplish is automated uh, visual inspections. So we were able to work, I mean, thanks to, once again, the AI Applied Consortium, we got to work with IBM using their Maximo visual inspection technology. And in many of the conventional manufacturing facilities, of course, we have a lot of these manual visual inspections going on, but due to the technology showcase we have, we're able to demonstrate how powerful it could be to use AI-driven approach in this case when it comes to inspecting these parts for any defects and so on. So I think in terms of people actually getting the buy-in, this is probably the best way to do it, because they can come to our lab, innovation lab in this case, and see things in action and really recognize how powerful this technology or the set of technologies could be.
Right. Yeah. So as you were talking, I shared the screen a little bit, I think, on the relevant talking points,
Mm-hmm.
showing maximal visual inspection, showing that infographic that kind of talked through all the different dimensions of AI that
Mm-hmm.
exist in that sandbox. So of course we've worked with some of our historical partners, NVIDIA, on getting some of that edge compute together. We were able to get a very relevant industrial robot, that FANUC robot that you saw,
Mm-hmm.
that's sitting in your lab. So that's one of the most popular industrial robots for a bunch of different industrial manufacturers. So I think it has a lot of relevance and connection to a real world manufacturing line, and the value, of course, beyond the supporting cast, John Williams, who's the lab coordinator yourself. Uh, the fact that that robot and its technologies are integrated into a lab where we can do things upstream, like machine parts, and bring them to this robot, like it really shows. It creates a very similar to real world representation of not just how AI can work, but to bring out the value of AI. You can't just look at these discrete solutions, right? Like in this particular case, that part, you're looking at the defects because
Mm-hmm.
there's a discrete need to look at defects, right? Because you want to automate the process of defects. But when you
Right.
digitize quality inspection, you can then correlate it to things upstream, like why are these defects happening, which is also a very common um,
Right.
auxiliary use case. So,
Yes.
so, so,
Mm-hmm.
so, and then speaking of the sustainability dimension of this, I think what when you do things like this, when you make production process better, you reduce the amount of scrap, you reduce the amount of energy needed to remachine or to reproduce because you're more precise and accurate in how you're producing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's obvious like tangential sustainability dimensions that just
Oh yeah.
inherently are part
Yeah.
of those use
Mm-hmm.
cases. So I thought all
Mm-hmm.
that was great. Um,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
um, so anyway, that's a good self promotion. I think maybe this is a good transition into
Mm-hmm.
uh, part of what I think the IoT lab and part of what you've communicated to me in both one-on-one conversations on our panels and through some of the work that we're trying to do with our manufacturing advisory council, and that's uh, workforce development. And workforce
Yes.
development can
Mm-hmm.
take on a variety of different lenses, right? Because one, there's workforce development for the workforce that is going into the manufacturing space, and how artificial intelligence and the automation of different types of workflows and the integration of AI and just digitization in general into the manufacturing line demands, well, a much more um, a much higher digital compute understanding. Like you just have to
Right.
understand how to use a computer. I mean, it has more to it, of course, but also demands that, at least in some roles, that role, as we build up skills for it is not just limited to the traditional way in which we have historically provided or taught it, right? Uh, Quality inspection and uh, quality engineering, right? There's obviously a science behind it, at least in some shape and some roles, but there's also like uh, trade jobs that teach quality inspection and machining steps, but they don't introduce traditionally, historically, the idea that, well, now you might actually be the supervisory control operator of an AI that is doing it, which requires
Right.
a deeper
Mm-hmm.
understanding of what you're trying to do and how what this black box is trying to do. Because really, what we're
Right.
trying to make sure of
Mm-hmm.
is that a the AI complements the workforce, right? In
Mm-hmm.
most cases, maybe now with some of the new stuff, it may have to move the workforce to a different place. Uh, but also that that workforce knows what to do with it. So that's one lens. Another lens, of course, which we'll talk about, is the use of AI to actually help workforce development, which is kind of the flip side of that coin.
All right. Yeah.
But I'll let you maybe just start that
Mm-hmm.
discussion topic. Tell us a little bit about what Penn State Du Bois is doing to support workforce development around artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
uh, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, we see, tremendous opportunities everywhere. It could be especially in the area of K through 12 education. And of course, we have these field trips. We have, K through 12 students invited to our campus all the time. And every time we have these students around us, we of course showcase the equipment we have. We try to expose them to these newly emerging technologies, including additive manufacturing and automation, especially in the context of Industry 4.0, as one of the steps to expose these students more to the emerging technologies, especially in the area of, I would say, artificial intelligence. We started a program called the Industry 4.0 Academy. And this particular Industry 4.0 Academy is currently focusing on high school seniors, but of course we could definitely expand the scope. But one of the reasons why we focus on high school seniors is because there is a lot of potential opportunity there when it comes to especially in this very sensitive time of these high school students trying to make a decision on their careers. I mean, whether to go to college, whether to try out different opportunities, especially in the area of manufacturing. We thought they would be much better off by learning all these emerging opportunities, especially in the area of cutting edge technologies such as artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, automation, robotics, cybersecurity, and all those different types of options they could have. So that's one of the reasons why we developed these learning modules around those emerging technologies. And AI is very, in this case, significantly featured in our Industry 4.0 Academy. And we've had our first cohort. This was a pilot we did in the previous academic year, and it's still ongoing, but the pilot has been really well received. And I spoke with some of the students. They tell me, this has been really an eye opener for them because, of course, they are familiar with the conventional technologies, but by being able to do a lot of hands-on, by being able to do like 3D printing, by being able to really work with the robots, by being able to learn more about what AI really means in the manufacturing setting, they can really make that connection between their aspirations and career aspirations in this case, and what kind of things they could be, doing as professionals once, they are out of high school settings.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you find that the generation of students today
Hmm.
are, because they're much more connected to technology in every shape and form, that this becomes like a seamless sort of acceptance of this sort of technology? Like, do you get a sense of that? Maybe in comparison to if you were to do this 20 years ago, people would be throwing their hands up and
Yeah, I think certainly in terms of the barriers, I mean, I think in terms of, I think you're talking about, resistance to technologies versus how receptive they are, right, to these technologies. And I think definitely they are more, yeah, receptive of these technologies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're, proficient in using these technologies, or they understand all the, essential details regarding how these technologies work that will actually help them professionally. So I would say they start with some sort of a curiosity, but then they realize, oh, this is something I'm interested in, and this is definitely very promising. I want to pursue this. I think that transition from just being a little curious and then getting there where, they really think of these technologies as their, career options. That's a big jump, and that's where we're trying to make the connection. That's where we're trying to bridge the gap here in,
yeah, I
the
mean, I
Chi
think
4.0
receptiveness.
Academy.
I used it 20 years ago time
Hmm.
frame because, well, I would still be in high school, but I would
Yeah.
be coming towards the end of high school. So I think if I heard this 20 years ago, I would be just as receptive to understanding it, especially coming out of high school, because I think it's a really, you're at a place where the the resistance, it's not related to your like perception of something taking your job or
Right.
or
Yeah.
some sort of negative sentiment towards a previous experience with the technology, especially not
Hmm.
coming from academia, where like you guys are the mentors to guide the workforce of the future. Um, and at the same time, AI is just everywhere in the
Yes.
mainstream, right? So it's like, I think it's an interesting topic. I'm sure it probably attracts a lot of people that are already in the tech or in the sphere of trying to be technologists of some shape or form. I think so. I think we're in a good spot,
Hmm.
especially they're in your hands. So and
We're
but so
trying.
right, and so we look forward to hearing more about that, right,
Hmm.
in maybe
Hmm.
follow up sessions or like
Hmm.
in blogs that we write. Which, by the way,
Hmm.
more homework for all the advisors and trustees. There's more
Of
blogs
course.
every week. But let's flip that around and talk about like using AI tooling to help with different types of learning activities that not necessarily, it could be learning about AI through AI, but it could be just learning with the help of AI. And I had a chance to, I actually read this quite some time ago and I just glanced over it again recently. So there are many universities that are working with artificial intelligence to support, I'll just call it um, different workflows, different use cases. Some of them are intended on supporting students, others are intended on supporting teachers, others are kind of in the space of like experimenting with what they can do. And we had some unique connections with a large public school system, and they shared with us a little bit about how their journey with artificial intelligence, which was a little, I don't want to say bumpy because they are probably one of the most state of the art public school systems in the
Hmm.
nation, but it was a learning experience for them, dealing with hallucinations of large
Hmm.
language models,
Yeah.
and then also finding ways to effectively bring at scale this technology. And at scale, it means that you really have to guardrail those hallucinations. At scale means you have to provide this to uh, large volumes of students at once. There's a cost dimension to all of that if you're trying to use these large world models. Like, is it worth spending hundreds of dollars on it, per student? Can you afford to do that sort of thing?
Right.
Uh, and then also, like, where can you bring this to? Like, and that changes every day. Well, I heard there's applications recently in different public school use cases where they use multimodal technologies, because there's a lot of visuals that you have to consider when you're trying to teach. So you can't just use, it's not just a Q&A with your teacher, right? And so the tech is moving so quickly, and then the use cases are obviously
Oh, yeah.
then being born from some of the capabilities of the tech. And then I heard specifically two universities, I think Arizona State University or
Yeah.
Arizona ASU, had a very open public announcement on the partnership with OpenAI, which I think is very promising. I think OpenAI is one of the best LLMs out there, and I've benchmarked many, and also still kind of very practical to use. But it was met with resistance, from what I read. Yeah,
Oh.
by I think predominantly teachers, not all of them, but I think there was some like lack of working with the community to grow this strategy. And then similarly, I read the University of Michigan had different types of initiatives in the classroom, and that included building a tutor for um, for a particular class. I mean, I'm sure there's other use cases. And similarly, I thought, like, well, here, like, they added some metrics, right? And we can start here. We'll work backwards. They talked about that this tutor improved the grade of the students, right? And which is great, right? But we all know these models potentially can hallucinate, right?
Yes.
And teachers aren't always right either, right? And you don't have to say that on the record, JR, but teachers aren't always right. And then there's this nuance that you brought up, which I'll let you bring up again, which is like large language models, when they hallucinate, they do a convincing job
Yeah,
of
such a good
hallucinating.
job. Yes.
People, when they're uncertain, sometimes don't answer. Sometimes say, "I don't know. I'll look into
Right.
it."
Yeah.
I have yet to interact with OpenAI and tell me I don't know. Like, can you tell me how to time travel? Hypothetically, it might tell you hypothetically because it's
Yeah.
data science, but it still doesn't say I don't know. So there's nuances there in how we bring AI into these sort of environments. So maybe you can start with that one, and then work your way backwards to, like, how do you see
Yeah.
using these sorts of AI tools
Yeah.
within the aspect of teaching, helping teach students, or helping with teachers' workflows or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are definitely different schools of thought out there. I mean, some of us, think of AI as a threat because there are a lot of these, I mean, including hallucinations, potential dangers associated with AI, and especially in academia. I think what we're concerned about is, it's very interesting. AI is artificial intelligence, but we're also worried about, you know, in this case, academic integrity. So it's still AI. So it's kind of, the acronym is the same, academic integrity and artificial intelligence. But I think one of the biggest concerns is really, academic integrity. And it's not just because of, I would say, the possibility of cheating, but it's also more about like meaningful learning, right? So if somebody just relies too much on AI, what is that person going to be learning at the end of the day? So I think the key thing is us really, emphasizing how important it is to be, I guess, less reliant in terms of just blindly accepting whatever the AI gives you, but focusing more on using AI as just one of the learning tools out there. I think making that distinction is going to be very important for us to make in order for us to get out of that mode of being just threatened by the technologies and simply just rejecting the technologies. So by really uh, trying to also present the um, the possibilities AI presents as a learning tool instead of some sort of a magic, magic box that just does everything for you, and you just get lazy as a learner at the end of the day, and not really being able to accomplish anything. So that is really the future we want to avoid. And because of that, I think what we really have to do with our students in this case is to be really able to make our students more independent thinkers, critical thinkers, focus more on genuinely human skills we have to develop as we try to work with our students to become intellectuals in this case. So
I
yeah,
don't want to be
that distinction is very
cliche because I hear a lot of
important.
like
Yeah.
these
Mm-hmm.
repetitive
Mm-hmm.
one-liner things about AI. One
Mm-hmm.
of the common ones is like, AI won't replace you, someone else using AI will, which we won't unpack today. But one of the other, let's call them analogies, is the large language model is the modern calculator, and that
Mm-hmm.
we as society still were able to introduce a calculator. Although I remember it being those scientific calculators with the ability to calculate graphs and logarithms and everything. I remember that being banned from some of my
Mm-hmm.
tests when I was in high school,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
yet we still were able to, you know, not become complacent to um, this tool to learn about mathematics.
Right.
So, what do you think about the notion of that and that analogy for calculators in the large language model?
I mean, I think there are very relevant analogies you used, and I would say, I mean, as a computer scientist, in order for you to be a very effective software developer, especially in this day and age, being familiar with AI and being productive with AI is very important because you may be able to do something, write your code without relying on AI at all, but by using AI as your assistant, you may be able to speed up your process of developing software, maybe twofold, threefold, and so on. So to be an effective, efficient software developer, I think it's really critical for you to understand what AI is capable of doing to help you. But however, if you don't really understand, how software development works, if you don't understand what software architecture is, if you don't really know how to program, whatever the AI, tools you're using generate may not be very meaningful in some cases because you don't really understand what's going on, and you just talked about hallucinations, and I could share a good example there because I was trying to do like some Python coding, and I wanted to basically convert uh, an image into a video file, and I actually asked AI to do the conversion, and in this case through a piece of code I was expecting AI to generate, and I was trying to debug that code for a while, and then my son is actually a data scientist with another, like one of the Fortune 100 companies, and he looked at the code and told me, Dad, that library doesn't exist. And that's why your code is not working. So if you don't really understand coding, if you don't know the libraries, if you don't know the nitty-gritty details, some of these products generated by AI may not be very helpful, because at the end of the day, you're going to be taking the ownership of the code. You have to make sure the software has the right architecture. We want to make sure the software is maintainable and so on. So without that intimate knowledge, you're not going to be very successful as a software engineer. And that's what we teach at universities and colleges. And if you don't really have those basic understanding of programming, software development, software engineering, it's going to be tough. But it could be very tempting, though, for students just to in this case make some AI, but in this case academic integrity violations and copy code and so on. But that's not going to help our students at all.
Right. Yeah. So I have one more kind of side topic that I wanted to cover around the idea of using AI to support different types of academic support for students and for teachers and otherwise. And it speaks a little bit about bias in data. So I've come across this recently, and I would encourage our viewers to take a look at this in the real world by using one of these large language models. And I don't take credit for the discovery. I just take credit for reading the discoveries, and they're not, maybe extraordinary discoveries, but they're cool to actually test. So if you look at um, a large language model and you ask it questions about randomizing a number from 1 to 10, uh, picking a color that's its favorite from a set of colors, it will it'll more often than not connect to, I think, the number 7 and blue as its color of choice. And that, maybe in the context of that question, is meaningless to the greater perspective of teaching. But the underlying principle behind it is that there is some topics that don't have necessarily linear answers. They're topics in, evolution. Well, I would say that has a linear answer, but we won't get into that. But there's topics across a variety of different philosophical areas and otherwise, that now, if you're using the large language model as the lens in which you're teaching or assisting in teaching that, are going to be heavily weighted towards the opinions that are the most common. In other words, it's if the general population, as the internet is representative of, I suppose, thinks its favorite color is blue at a quarter of the population, the large language model will gravitate to that answer with orders of magnitude higher response. And so I believe that is also relevant for the sort of nonlinear topics that you're looking to provide information on. And of course, there's guardrails that you can implement to prevent that, but that doesn't happen by just using the black box monolith that we have in a large language model.
Yeah, and please also remember that, whatever the system we're using, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of code. It's created by, in this case, it's maybe auto-generated too, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is this is what we created, lines of code, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It cannot be perfect.
So let's unpack the last thing that you just said a little bit on code generation. And we won't have to talk about code generation too much, but I want to talk about the idea that, you're kind of the same topic. You're going to school and you're learning how to code. And now you have this, I'm just going to call it an omnipowerful, unseen in our modern time tool that is large language model assisted code generation, which gives you tremendous amount of power to build out different things for purpose, but also demands that, like you said, that you understand, you at least understand the code that you're generating, because, well, today it's not perfect, but it does do a lot.
Okay.
and it greatly accelerates your development time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you see this across industry with all sorts of different initiatives that are either enforcing the use of tools that do assisted code generation or replacing or consolidating teams. But behind that topic sits a topic that I think is relevant to academia, and that's the speed in which this technology is moving, both in the code generation side and all across the other dimensions of artificial intelligence. And the idea that, like, tomorrow, and I use that term loosely, tomorrow in 5 years, tomorrow in 10 years, code generation could be near perfect. By the way, I think you probably were using an unpaid model, an unpaid version, because I've never had it given me the wrong libraries. I've had it give me erroneous
Mm-hmm.
like code to do the wrong thing, but I never had it give me libraries. So I'm going to point you, and I'm going to give you one of my subscriptions, or we can use one of the
Sure,
Consortium
we
ones.
can
We
give that
we
another try,
we,
yeah, and
we
see
got
what happens.
we got the pro versions here, so we
Yeah,
can do that.
yeah. I'm sure, yeah, there are
Uh,
differences in their capabilities, yes.
but the point I'm getting to
Mm-hmm.
is, how do you account
Mm-hmm.
for this sort of unique, super moving technology
Mm-hmm.
that I've never seen evolve, any technology evolve this quickly in terms of its capabilities, and assure that you're aligning future curriculums and workforce development efforts,
Mm-hmm.
considering the speed in which this is, considering,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll challenge this to the audience and to you,
Oh, yeah.
as my personal opinion, is that I
Mm-hmm.
believe that development
Mm-hmm.
in the next 5 years will be obsolete. You're still going to need to architect, understand, and I think most fundamentally problem solve, to be able to use these tools effectively. But now, how does that shift? And maybe you can't answer all these questions because it's not because that's a big
Mm-hmm.
piece to bite. But let's take a
Mm-hmm.
small bite out of this in
Oh,
any shape
yeah,
that you like.
yeah, yeah. I
But
would,
how do you address that in being able to teach the students
yeah.
uh, better and with more
Mm-hmm.
meaningful
Mm-hmm.
insight?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think tools are gonna continue to change and tools are gonna get better and better. However, I think what doesn't change is, you know, you really having that control over what's going to be accepted versus what's going to be, rejected or I mean adjusted, fixed, and so on. And that oversight is what the professionals in this case can provide. And in order for you to be able to provide those types of oversight capabilities, I mean you gotta have that knowledge. And I think the technology itself is really a moving target. And as you said, I mean, the technology today may be obsolete, tomorrow. So I think one of the qualities we have to have professionals, especially in this AI-driven world, is of course willingness to learn, every day, willingness to adapt, and that I think is something very invaluable that could be learned, throughout, especially in this case, because I am in the domain of college education. And one of the core things we try to teach is, instead of giving students fish, but teaching them how to fish in this case. So as long as you become a lifelong learner at the end of the process, and as long as you have that very solid foundation, I mean, because I'm a computer scientist, I guess I can only talk about computer science in this case. But if you have that solid foundation as a computer scientist, I think you could be continuously successful throughout this AI journey, no matter what new technologies come out, because you will be nimble, you will be able to adapt to the new technologies, you'll quickly learn how to use, the newly emerging technologies. I mean, we talk about these, multiple languages. We didn't have Python when I was learning all these computer science topics. We had very like archaic, languages we learned. However, over the years, we learned Java, we learned how to use Python, we learned all these new things, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, especially in the current form and so on. And I think you really have to have that. I mean, going back to some of the talking points I shared earlier, we have to have that curiosity. As a lifelong learner, we have to have the willingness to continue to learn and adapt. I think that's really the key thing, and what we have to focus as higher education people, higher education professionals, I would say in this case, is really teaching students those, I would say, more those softer skills, so that they continue to learn these new things coming up.
Yeah, I like that lifelong learner dimension that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to reflect with myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I came out of college with a software engineering degree, and most of the technologies that I use today, I never learned historically. I mean, you learn fundamentals, object-oriented fundamentals, and you learn how to use a computer and use a development studio and compile code and all that. But I'd like to think that I was a lifelong learner,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Getting exposed to new technologies. Part of that is
Yeah.
just being interested. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have. I don't think I would be a lifelong learner if I didn't love
Oh yeah.
what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I mean, maybe another topic. Uh, I'll just call it, say, just to glaze over lightly, is that I know you guys do adult workforce development as well, and that, in my opinion, maybe isn't an easy of a barrier because there has been maybe not lifelong learning activities that have taken place, and now there is a shift in, and you don't have to give your examples. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
thinking like historically what I see, right? Uh, Automation in the automotive sector, right?
Mm-hmm.
Automation in mining, automation in a lot of blue collar jobs. Um, how do you bridge that gap? Is there? I mean, maybe there isn't a single answer, but
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that there's got to be ways in which you. I know you guys are trying to do that, and you guys
Yeah.
are. You kind of went through some interesting learning topics with me on the powder and metal industry and things like that. So
Mm. Oh
I
yeah.
thought
Yeah.
that was it was both educational for me, but I thought it was also it spoke to a very specific type of industry
Mm-hmm.
that has a specific way of doing things with
Mm-hmm.
a workforce that has been doing the same thing for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do you bridge those gaps? And I'll say just don't try to. I know there's probably hours of talk around that, but just give it to me in like 30
Sure.
seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it is being open-minded, and I think as professionals, I mean, working in manufacturing, I think a lot of people already have that kind of mindset. So it may be easier than we think, and we have plenty of evidence out there because, of course, the powder metal industry is the major industry uh, in our area. And actually, the reason where we are, it's called the powder metal capital of the world. So very well known for the pressed materials and powder metal industry. But I'm sure, yeah, the powder metal industry overall has gone through many transformations over the years, because one of the, I think, changes they're facing right now is because of the electrification. I mean, so a lot of these internal combustion engine industry, where powder metal industry was very prominent, is now transitioning into more electric vehicles and so on. So because of all these changes, I think they had to adapt. And when you actually go out to one of the manufacturing facilities where we are, you'll be amazed, because depending on, of course, where you go, but you will see the state of the art manufacturing facilities, very clean, lots of robots, even sensors and also automated visual inspections. I mean, some of those technologies are already out there, although, I mean, there are different degrees of, I would say, adoption. So I think these people working in the powder metal industry are perfectly capable of catching up. And a lot has to do is really the exposure. And that's where we come in. And we try to bring the new technologies to our region, try to introduce them to the manufacturers in our region, and they send their workers to our training sessions. We've already done so many different kinds of training programs in our region, and every time we've been able to fill the classes. So I have no doubt these workers, I mean, motivated, will be able to pick up these new pieces of knowledge and will be able to adjust. They just
Right.
need opportunities.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
you're providing. So that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm, yeah.
All right. So the last set of
Mm-hmm,
questions, and JR, you know me, I'm going to be out in
mm-hmm,
left field, completely
mm-hmm.
unrelated, but since people waited to the end, either they're very
Okay.
interested and they won't
Yeah.
mind, or they
Mm-hmm,
deserve to hear this from us.
mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
So, totally unrelated. Uh, what is your opinion about? By the way, this is unrehearsed, so you haven't
Okay.
heard this.
Oh my
What is
gosh.
what is your opinion about artificial intelligence becoming sentient, and what do you plan to do if and when it does?
Oh, yeah. I don't think we're prepared for that. And some of us, we doubt, that will ever happen. But I mean, nobody can really say for sure. And I think we really need to find a way to coexist, right, with this uh, thing called artificial intelligence. And one of the best ways to do it is to pay attention to the potential, I would say, pitfalls, I would say, uh, especially when it comes to things like biases. I mean, you talked about, the color choice, blue. I mean, my favorite color is, of course, blue because I'm with Penn State.
That is
And
biased just inherently, but
yeah,
okay.
it's a bias. I'm wearing blue right now. Yeah, so that type of thing is really important for us to pay attention to. How do we remove, all these biases as much as possible? Because at the end of the day, we write the code, right? Oh, of course, some of the code generation will be automated. How about data protection? How about privacy? So although we cannot really predict what our future will be in the next 20 years, if we really work towards ensuring those types of key, elements protecting us from the potential pitfalls of the technology, the more we work on those types of things, I would say the better. And that will help us ensure definitely the brighter future for us instead of the Terminator future.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I love that answer. And for
Mm-hmm.
the viewers that are going to listen to
Mm-hmm.
this, we're going to unpack this some more on the
Mm-hmm.
upcoming podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I intend on asking that question, and then at some point giving my opinion on how I see things. I guess we'll keep that mysterious for now to keep people interested in the next series. But I wanted, JR, before I conclude the podcast, to give you a chance to share, if there's one takeaway that you'd want the audience to leave with
Mm-hmm.
after listening to today's session, what would it be?
Yeah, I don't think I can really follow your instructions very well because I have three things, but it's gonna be
Three
short.
things is fine.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
make it
So,
sound like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
light.
yeah. So I was, gonna say, be more proactive, keep learning, be prepared, and another key piece I think is working together, just like what we're doing. We work with K through 12, students. We work with our manufacturers in our area, industry, local industry people in our area. But we really have to work together to ensure that brighter future. And finally, don't be afraid of changes.
Perfect. Or sentient AI. Is that the one you said? That's the changes. Okay.
Embrace
Well,
the changes. Yes.
JR, thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much for
Mm-hmm.
joining me today. I appreciate your words. We'll, have a lot of opportunity to share more of this insight to our communities, and we're looking to grow those. Uh, I look forward to seeing you at the Shift conference,
Yes.
May the 13th in Denver, with
Mm-hmm.
one of our partners, the National Association of Wholesalers. And then for our upcoming next podcast series, we're going to be speaking with Martin Gonzalez, who's the Director of Innovation for BP, across a spectrum of different topics around AI. We're going to publish the topics and the time later on this week or early next week. So for those of you that are following, we'll be able to share that with you, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the next series. JR, thank you very much again. Have a good day. Appreciate it. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody. And we'll see you soon.
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.